The desert sun was strong that day, burning over the open shooting range in Nevada. The sand was dry, the air was hot, and the wind moved like an invisible hand across the land. It was a place made for silence, focus, and serious skill. But today, it was also a place of challenge. Military experts had gathered for something special. Not an official competition, not for medals or records, but a private test of skill. The goal was simple, yet almost impossible: to hit a steel target set exactly 4,000 meters away. That's 4 kilometers, more than 2.5 miles. Snipers from different elite units came to try. Some were from the Marines, some from the Army, others from special forces in other countries. All of them had years of experience. Many had seen combat, and some had made famous shots in real missions. They brought their best rifles, long, heavy, and powerful. Spotters stood next to them with rangefinders and wind meters. They studied the wind, checked the sun, and calculated bullet drop. Every small detail mattered at that distance. The first sniper lay flat on the ground, looked through the scope, and held his breath. He fired, and the bullet flew. Everyone watched the screen, waiting. The bullet missed, not by much, but enough. The second sniper tried, adjusting his scope more carefully. He missed too. One after another, they all took their turns. Each one believed they had a chance. Each one came close. But none of them could hit the target. The steel plate stood untouched, silent, as if mocking them all. The wind was not strong, but it kept changing, left, right, then nothing. At 4,000 meters, even a tiny change in wind could move a bullet by meters. The Earth's curve had to be measured, and the bullet's spin had to be calculated. It was science, math, patience, and a bit of luck. By the time the 13th sniper missed, the mood was heavy. There were sighs, quiet words, and even a few jokes to lighten the moment. Someone said, "Maybe this shot is just not meant to be." Another said, "We need a magician, not a sniper." But in the background, someone had been watching quietly. Not cheering, not laughing, not even taking notes. He stood near the shade, arms crossed, wearing a plain shirt and dark sunglasses. He didn't wear a uniform, but there was something about him. Calm, sharp, serious. Some knew who he was, others didn't. But his name was Logan Vance, a retired Navy SEAL. Not just any SEAL. He was a Master Chief, one of the highest ranks in the field. A man who had completed secret missions, made unrecorded shots, and trained some of the best. He didn't speak as the others failed. He just watched, listened, and waited. No one had invited him to shoot. He wasn't even listed as a participant. But when the last sniper missed, and everyone started packing up, someone joked, "Unless the ghost in the corner wants to try." There was laughter, but Logan stepped forward slowly. He looked at the steel target in the distance, then looked at the rifle on the ground. He said 5 simple words, calm and clear. "Let me handle that." Everyone stopped. The laughter faded. They weren't sure if he was serious, but they stepped aside and watched. Something was about to happen. Something different. The impossible shot still waited. But so did the man who had spent a lifetime doing what others thought couldn't be done. And in that moment, the desert felt quieter, as if even the wind was holding its breath. While the best shooters in the world lined up one by one, aiming for a target no one could hit, a quiet figure stood in the shadows. He didn't cheer when they fired, didn't shake his head when they missed. He didn't even move much, just stood with arms crossed, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. To most people there, he was just another visitor. Someone's retired uncle maybe, or a coach from an older era. But a few of the men on the range knew exactly who he was, and they said nothing. There was a kind of respect that didn't need to be spoken. His name was Logan Vance. He wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, and didn't wear his past on his sleeve. But those who had served with him knew he had once been one of the deadliest snipers in the world. A former Navy SEAL Master Chief, the kind who trained ghosts, not men. Vance had been in more countries than he could name. He had crawled across deserts, hidden in frozen forests, and taken shots that others said were impossible. He had stories, but he never told them. He had scars, but he never showed them. To Vance, silence was not just golden, it was survival. And even now, years after retirement, that silence followed him like a shadow. The 4,000-meter target had already defeated 13 of the world's best. Some of them grunted in frustration. Others shook their heads and laughed it off. It was a hard pill to swallow, even for the proudest of soldiers. They had done everything right, measured wind, corrected for the Earth's curve, checked temperature and humidity. Still, no one could land the shot. But Logan Vance had been watching something else. Not just the wind or the target. He had been watching them. How they held their rifles, how fast they fired, how they trusted their spotters too much and their own breathing too little. He noticed the small errors, the overthinking, the tight shoulders, the rushed decisions masked as confidence. That was the difference. Sniping wasn't about ego, it wasn't about strength. It was about stillness, patience, and knowing that nature would only listen if you moved with it, not against it. At the edge of the shooting line, a young Navy trainee stood near Vance, barely 22, fresh out of sniper school. He kept glancing sideways at the older man. He'd read stories about Vance in training manuals, some thought were myths. And now here he was, alive, real, and quiet. "Sir," the young man whispered, "did you ever try a shot like that?" Vance didn't turn his head, didn't nod, didn't blink. He just said, low and even, "Longer." The trainee's eyes widened, but he stayed quiet. Others nearby didn't hear the word, or if they did, they didn't believe it. Then came the final shot of the day, Sniper 13. Another miss, another sigh. People began to collect their gear. Instructors called for a wrap-up. Someone joked, "We'd need a miracle for that target." Another laughed, "Unless this guy has some magic," motioning toward Vance with a smirk. That's when it happened. Vance took off his sunglasses and stepped forward. His voice was calm, flat, no louder than it needed to be. "Let me handle that." The air changed. Not the wind, the air, the feeling in the space. People turned, surprised, curious, some amused. But no one spoke. He walked toward the rifle slowly, like a man walking into church. There was no rush in his step, no fire in his eyes. Just calm, cool focus. He knelt beside the weapon, looked through the scope, adjusted it, then paused. It was the pause that told the real story. This man was not guessing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was thinking with every part of his body. And though no shot had been fired yet, everyone could feel something was different. For the first time all day, the impossible didn't feel so far away. Logan Vance wasn't there to prove anything. He wasn't there for glory. He was just a man who knew how to listen. Not with his ears, but with his instincts. And when he placed his hand on the rifle's grip, it was like the air itself leaned in to listen too. When Logan Vance stepped forward and said, "Let me handle that," the air changed. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't meant to impress. But somehow, those 5 words carried more weight than 100 shouted commands. The other snipers froze, halfway through packing up. Some looked confused, others curious. A few raised eyebrows, unsure whether to laugh or watch. A nearby Marine captain smirked and said under his breath, "Old guy wants a turn." Someone else chuckled, "Let him break his shoulder trying." But no one stopped him. No one dared. Vance approached the rifle slowly, as if every step mattered. He wasn't dramatic, but something about him made people quiet. He knelt beside the weapon, ran his fingers along the barrel, and began adjusting the scope, without asking anyone. His hands moved with calm confidence, not checking, but correcting. Behind him, the whispers began. Who is that guy? Why is he touching the gear? Did anyone even invite him? But someone whispered back, "That's Logan Vance." The tone changed. Some recognized the name, others didn't. One sniper said, "No way, the Logan Vance? From Task Force Trident." Another replied, "I thought he was just a myth." The younger trainees leaned in, trying to listen without seeming obvious. They had heard stories, passed around like legends at night, about a sniper who could hit a moving target from miles away, a man who once made a confirmed shot from a helicopter during a sandstorm. They never imagined they'd see him in person, let alone step in after 13 misses. Still, not everyone was impressed. An Air Force sharpshooter crossed his arms and muttered, "This isn't the movies." A British SAS sniper scoffed, "Even math can't fix 4,000 meters." Doubt floated through the air like dust. Because what Logan Vance was about to attempt wasn't just difficult. It was considered impossible. The instructors didn't interfere. They knew enough to stay silent. They had seen Vance shoot before, years ago, in moments no one talks about on record. If he was stepping up now, there was a reason. As he finished setting up, he laid flat on the mat, his body aligned with the rifle like it was part of him. He checked the wind with a simple strip of cloth, tied to a stick, no high-tech gadgets. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slow and deep. Behind him, more whispers came. He's not even using a spotter. He's not writing down data. Where's his weather chart? But to Logan Vance, it wasn't about the gear. It was about the feeling, the way the wind moved, the way the light bent, the way the earth pulled. He had spent decades learning how to feel those things. A young Army sniper finally said what others were thinking. Does he really think he can do it? The older Marine next to him replied without looking away. He doesn't think, he knows. Still, the tension in the air was thick. Every man there had missed the shot, some by inches, some by more. They had used everything they'd been taught, and still failed. So how could one man, alone, quiet, and calm, make the shot they couldn't? As Vance prepared to fire, even the skeptical ones stopped talking, not because they believed in him, but because something in the moment demanded silence. It wasn't about respect, it was about instinct, the kind that tells you, pay attention, something is about to happen. No countdown, no drama. Vance's finger rested on the trigger. His breathing slowed. The wind paused, or maybe it just seemed to. And then, just before he squeezed, he whispered something to himself. No one heard what he said, but those close enough saw his lips move, like a prayer or a promise. He pulled the trigger. The sound rang out, not too loud, but crisp and clear. And then came the waiting. 8 long seconds of silence. But that part, the shot, that comes next. Right now, what mattered was this. That for the first time that day, someone believed in the impossible, and everyone else. They were beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they were about to witness history. Logan Vance lay flat on the shooting mat, the desert heat pressing against his back. But he didn't notice the sun, or the whispers, or the tension in the air. He noticed only the rifle, the earth beneath him, and the wind in front of him. To the others, it looked like he was just lying still. But inside that silence, 1,000 calculations were happening. Not written down, not spoken, just felt, measured by instinct, refined through years of training and survival. His cheek pressed against the rifle stock, his hands steady, his breathing calm. Every part of his body was working together, not to fight the weapon, but to become part of it. Some shooters forced the shot. Thinking power makes the bullet fly straighter. Vance knew better. You don't fight the rifle. You listen to it. He adjusted the scope again, gently, carefully, checking for glare, adjusting elevation, correcting for parallax. He tilted the rifle slightly to counter a slight crosswind, the kind too soft for most to feel. But he felt it, like a whisper brushing across his fingers. The spotter scope nearby sat unused. No one stood beside him to call wind, range, or temperature. He didn't want help. He didn't need it. Back behind the line, the crowd was silent. No one moved. No one laughed. They had never seen anyone approach a shot this way. One instructor leaned toward another and whispered, "It's like he's meditating." The other replied, "That's not meditation. That's memory." Vance was remembering every mission, every long-range shot, every breath he had ever taken behind a rifle. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about feeling. And he had learned long ago that the wind carries more than air. It carries truth, if you're willing to listen. He watched the heat waves rising off the sand. They twisted and danced like ghosts, making the target shimmer. At 4,000 meters, even light becomes a trickster. But Logan Vance knew that trick too. He'd played this game before, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in jungles and mountains no one speaks of. The target was barely a dot now, a steel plate sitting far beyond normal reach. Others had seen it as a challenge, an enemy, a puzzle. Vance saw it as a partner. To hit it, he needed to understand it, respect it. He closed his eyes, just for a second. It looked like rest, but it wasn't. It was focus, full, complete, and deep. He breathed in slowly, filling his lungs, then let the air out in one smooth, quiet stream. That breath told him everything: wind direction, humidity, pressure, even the way his heartbeat touched the barrel. When he opened his eyes again, the world was quieter. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He was now fully locked in, mind, body, and rifle. People watching didn't understand it. They thought he was being dramatic. But those who had been in real combat, the older ones, they knew. This was what the moment before a life-or-death shot looked like. Stillness, silence, and total surrender to the process. The desert seemed to hold its breath with him. Even the wind paused, curious to see what this man would do. And then, with barely a sound, Logan Vance placed his finger on the trigger. Not tense, not forced, just there, ready, calm, certain. One last breath. In, out, pause. He didn't rush, didn't wait too long. When it was time, he knew. And in that instant, he gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked lightly, the sound cracked across the range. But Vance didn't move, didn't lift his head. He stayed exactly where he was, eyes still in the scope. The bullet was already gone, flying through heat, wind, and gravity. Now all he could do was wait. 8 seconds. 8 long, silent seconds. Longer than a heartbeat, shorter than a memory. Everyone behind him watched the monitors. Some leaned forward, some held their breath. The silence was heavier now, filled with wonder and disbelief. Would it hit? Could it hit? Was this the moment the impossible became real? But Vance didn't ask those questions. He already knew the answer. The rifle's sound faded into the heat of the desert. The sharp crack echoed once, then vanished like it had never happened. And then, nothing. Just silence, thick and full. The bullet was flying. Somewhere far beyond the scope's edge, racing across 4 kilometers of dust, wind, and heat. It was a .408 caliber round, made for long distances. But this wasn't just long, it was legendary. Behind Logan Vance, no one moved. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if curious. 8 seconds had never felt so long. People had counted seconds before, during combat, during rescue missions, during CPR. But these 8 seconds were different. They stretched across space and time. They were seconds heavy with hope, and doubt, and history. The steel target at 4,000 meters sat still in the sun. For the past hour, it had taken hit after hit. Of air, of near misses, of failures. But not a single bullet had touched its surface. Until now. Then, from far across the desert, came the sound. A faint ping, small and distant. It didn't sound like much, just a tiny note of metal being tapped. But on that day, in that moment, it was the sound of the impossible becoming real. Someone gasped. A trainee dropped his notebook. The instructors looked at each other in disbelief. Did that just? One began. Yeah, the other replied. Eyes still locked on the screen. That just happened. On the live monitor, the slow-motion camera confirmed it. The bullet had struck the center of the plate, just slightly off bullseye, but a clean hit. No ricochet, no edge scrape. A direct impact. The snipers who had missed before stood frozen. Some wide-eyed, some shaking their heads in silent respect. One leaned forward, muttering, no wind correction device, no spotter, no range card. And he still nailed it. The sound may have been small, but the message was thunder. Logan Vance still hadn't moved. He stayed behind the rifle, breathing slow, eyes in the scope. It wasn't pride. It was habit. You hold position after the shot. You wait, you confirm. You stay professional. Only after the confirmation came through did he slowly rise. He dusted his hands off on his pants, took a quiet breath, and stood up. Still no smile, no fist pump, no ego. Just stillness. The kind that comes only from a man who had done this before. More than once. In places no one could talk about. People began clapping, but not loud. It wasn't the kind of moment for wild cheering. This was reverence. This was watching a master at work. A young Marine finally whispered, that wasn't just a shot. An Army sniper nodded slowly. That was a lesson. Vance walked away from the line, as quiet as he had arrived. No speech, no explanation. But in the hearts of everyone there, something had shifted. He had shown them that skill was more than gear, more than data, more than the latest tech. Skill was presence. Skill was the ability to silence every doubt, every distraction, and trust the shot. One of the range officers stepped forward, eyes still wide. "Chief Vance," he said, almost unsure how to speak. What, what was your secret?" Logan Vance paused, glanced back at the rifle, then looked at the man. He said only one thing. "You don't fire the bullet," he replied. "You become it." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a crowd of stunned soldiers. And one steel plate with a single hole in it, proof that sometimes legends are real. After Logan Vance walked away from the firing line, the crowd stayed quiet. Not because they were confused, and not because they didn't believe what they saw. They were quiet because they did believe it. And that belief was still settling into their bones. Some of them had come with pride, with confidence, thinking they were the best. Some had brought the latest rifles, the best scopes, advanced calculators, wind meters, and laser rangefinders. They had all brought noise. But Vance had brought silence, and he had won. He didn't take a photo, didn't give a quote, didn't shake hands. He simply walked to the edge of the range, picked up his cap, and sat on an old metal bench under a shade net. Like it was just another day. Like he hadn't just done something no one else could do. Eventually, one of the instructors walked over to him, slowly, carefully. A tall man, former Delta Force, someone who had led missions in hostile zones. But now, he looked like a student. He sat beside Vance, staying quiet for a moment, then finally said, "You've still got it, Chief." Vance didn't respond right away. He just looked out at the empty range. The steel target in the distance was barely a dot with a hole in the center. "I never lost it," Vance said softly. "But I don't bring it out unless I have to." The instructor nodded, then asked the question everyone wanted to know. "How did you do it? What's the secret?" Vance turned his head slowly, then looked back out at the range. "Everyone out there was fighting the shot," he said. "They were thinking too loud, moving too much, trying too hard." He tapped his chest gently. "You can't take a 4,000-meter shot with muscle. You take it with stillness." He explained, not with long words, not with big lessons, but with the kind of quiet wisdom that comes only from real experience. "Out there, the wind's a liar," he said. "It changes without warning, pretends to be calm, then shifts at the last second. You can't beat it by guessing or hoping. You have to listen to it, like it's speaking its own language." The instructor asked, "And you always shoot without a spotter?" Vance shook his head once. "Not always," he said. "But sometimes, the silence tells you more than a second voice ever could." Then he added something that stuck with the instructor for years. "You don't shoot to prove a point. You shoot because it needs to be done, clean, clear, no noise." Another young sniper approached them, maybe 23, with bright eyes and 1,000 questions. He asked, "Chief, how long did it take you to learn to shoot like that?" Vance looked at him, not with pride or pity, but with honesty. "I'm still learning," he said. "Every shot teaches you something new, even the ones you miss." The boy looked confused. "But you didn't miss today." Vance smiled. Just a little, the kind of smile that fades before it finishes. "I didn't miss today," he said. "But yesterday? 10 years ago? 20? I missed plenty. And every one of those misses taught me how to hit this one." Back at the range, the snipers started packing up again. But they were quieter now, slower, more thoughtful. They weren't just thinking about wind and rifles anymore. They were thinking about mindset, about presence, about respect for the craft. Later that night, in a small tent by the edge of the base, a few of them gathered around a table. They didn't talk about the hit itself. They talked about what they saw in Vance. Not just skill, but discipline, focus, and humility. One of them wrote in his notebook, "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the sharpest edge in the room." And back on that bench, Logan Vance sat alone as the sun dipped low. He didn't ask for thanks, didn't look for praise. He had done what needed to be done, then returned to the quiet. Because for him, silence wasn't just a tool. It was home. By the next morning, word of the shot had already spread. No photos had been taken, and no video was posted online. But across the base, and beyond, people were talking. Not in loud voices, not with fanfare, but in quiet conversations between instructors, officers, and soldiers who had seen it with their own eyes. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. The steel target at 4,000 meters still stood out there in the desert. But now, it had a mark, one clean hole in the center, like a whisper made visible. A reminder that even the impossible had to answer to precision. Training resumed that day as normal. Rifles were cleaned, lessons were taught, shots were fired. But the mood had shifted. The atmosphere wasn't competitive anymore. It was curious, focused, almost humble. The instructors didn't need to say much. The students had seen something rare, and it was teaching them more than words ever could. One young sniper trainee, who had missed his target by over 20 feet the day before, returned with a new mindset. He adjusted his breathing, calmed his hands, and whispered before pulling the trigger. He still missed, but only by a few inches. And when asked what changed, he simply said, "I remembered how still he was." Back in the officer's tent, talk turned to what Vance had shown. It wasn't just a shot, they said. It was a demonstration. A reminder that no matter how modern the gear or advanced the data, it's the human behind the scope that makes the shot count. Plans quietly began to form. A new sniper module was drafted, focused not on speed or power, but on stillness, silence, patience, and presence. It would be called Vance Dynamics. Not because he asked for it, but because no other name made sense. It included sections like shooting without ego, listening to the wind, and learning from the miss. Each one inspired by the way Vance approached his craft, not as a game, but as a discipline. Meanwhile, Vance himself had already packed his small bag. He wasn't staying. He had come for a visit, a quiet watch, and somehow ended up leaving a mark no one could ignore. One instructor tried to catch him before he left. He found Vance near a supply truck, loading his gear without saying much. "Chief," the instructor said, "what you did out there?" Vance raised a hand gently. "No need," he said. "Let the shot speak." "But people should know," the instructor insisted. "They should learn from it." "They will," Vance replied, closing the truck's tailgate. "But not because of my name. Because of the way it made them feel." Respect had taken a new shape. It wasn't about rank or medals or number of confirmed kills. It was about mastery, the kind that comes from years of practice and the courage to stay silent when others shout. That night, around a small campfire near the training zone, a few instructors and snipers sat together. They weren't drinking or celebrating. They were remembering, reflecting. And for the first time in a long while, they weren't talking about how to hit a target. They were talking about why. "He didn't need to prove anything," one said. "He didn't act like he was better than anyone," said another. "But when he stepped up, we all knew." They didn't call him a legend. Legends are made by stories, and Vance had made a moment. Something real, something shared, something that couldn't be erased. A young trainee wrote a message in chalk on the back of the range trailer before going to bed. It said, "Some men speak through words, others through shots. We listened." The next day, the chalk was still there. And though the wind would one day erase it, the lesson remained, etched not on steel, but on the hearts of those who were there. Respect had been rewritten, not through speeches, not through orders, but through silence, stillness, and a single, perfect shot. When the sun rose the next morning, Logan Vance was already gone. No goodbye, no handshake, no note. Just an empty bench, a used rifle mat, and the sound of wind brushing against the sand. His name wasn't called out during morning briefings. There were no medals, no public thank yous. But everyone noticed the silence he left behind. A silence that somehow felt louder than gunfire. The steel plate he had hit still stood, still marked with a clean hole in its center. People stopped to stare at it throughout the day. Some took pictures, others just nodded and walked on. No one dared to move it. No one asked for it to be replaced. It had become more than a target. It had become a symbol. Later that week, a quiet change was made in the shooting range manual. Under extreme long-range shot, a note was added. Confirmed at 4,000 meters. Observed by 27 witnesses. No name was listed. Just the record, the moment, the truth. Instructors began using phrases they had picked up from Vance. "Don't fight the rifle. Let the wind speak first. Stillness before skill. Trainees wrote them in the margins of their notebooks, not knowing where the words came from, only that they worked. Back in the city, far from the desert, a high-ranking officer received a handwritten message on his desk. It was from Vance, delivered through unofficial channels. The note was short, direct, and written in clean block letters. The shot is just the echo, the learning is in the silence. After that, no one heard from him for a long time. He didn't return calls, didn't show up at veteran events, didn't appear in documentaries. His name faded from daily talk, but never from memory. There were rumors, of course. Some said he moved to the mountains, living off the grid. Others believed he taught sniping in secret, training only those who passed a test with no words. A few claimed he was writing a book, but no one ever found a copy. Truth was, no one really knew, and maybe that's how he wanted it. One day, a younger sniper posted online about the ghost shot at 4,000 meters. The post got thousands of views. Some people said it was fake, others said it was classified. But those who were there didn't argue. They just smiled quietly. Years later, that same steel target, now rusted and weathered, was moved to a training museum on base. It was displayed with a small plaque that read, "One shot, one lesson." Again, no name, just respect. Among the visitors, new recruits would ask, "Who made that shot?" The instructors would pause and say, "Someone who understood silence better than sound." One rainy afternoon, a small package arrived at the base's mailroom. It had no return address, no markings. Inside was a folded cloth, a worn sniper's sling, and a note. It read, "Pass it to the one who doesn't speak first." The sling was framed and hung in the advanced sniper classroom. A quiet message for those who might one day understand. Because in a world filled with noise, flash, and show, Logan Vance had become something else. A reminder that real mastery doesn't shout. It doesn't need cameras or crowds. It just shows up, does the job, and disappears again. Like the wind, like the shot, like the silence that follows. And even though his name faded from rosters and reports, in every sniper school, in every quiet breath before a trigger pull, there was always a little piece of Logan Vance. Not in the words, not in the stories, but in the pause before the shot, where the world goes quiet, and the impossible becomes real.